Hello! In high school, you read a lot of books, and some of those books are amazing books, and some of those books are terrible books. In my high school career, I read 17 books, and in this video I'm going to be talking about what I thought of them as books and what I thought of them as choices for high school, especially in the year that I read them. Keep in mind that it's been a while since I read a lot of these, and I'm also going to try to keep this as short as possible, so this isn't going to be like full reviews, they're more going to be like little snippets. The first book I read my freshman year was Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which I actually thought was a very clever choice. It's about these two best buddies, George and Lenny. Lenny has special needs and George kind of takes care of him, and about the jobs that they have in their lives kind of in the countryside. I think this was a smart decision because it introduces topics that you might not think about as a measly little 9th grader, but it's also not too challenging. You know, it was relatively short and easy to understand. Of course, there was metaphor and there were difficult things in the book, but it overall was not too difficult of a book. The next book was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which again I think was a brilliant choice, not just because it's an amazing book, but because of what it teaches a young 9th grader in an almost entirely white school. The majority of my classmates, including myself, has never had to really be confronted with the idea of prejudice, especially racial prejudice, so getting to read this book and getting to see the perspective, even though yes it's through a white narrator, is still something that we were introduced to for the first time through a book. And then next was The Pearl by John Steinbeck. Let's just say I wasn't as fond of that book. To be honest, I cannot tell you the plot at all. It would be interesting for me to read it now as I'm more mature, and I might appreciate it as a piece of literature, but it doesn't have an enticing plot or characters like Of Mice and Men or To Kill a Mockingbird had to really draw in a 9th grader. And then the last book we read that year was Romeo and Juliet by my man, Billy Shakes, which I love. What I loved about the way that my class read Romeo and Juliet was it was really the first time all year that we were able to think analytically about each of the characters and about things that were so much deeper than just the text. And of course, Romeo and Juliet, which is so often seen as the quintessential love story, we're able to break down and see all of the flaws. And I think it's a really good first play to experience in high school. Moving on to sophomore year, my summer reading book was Paper Towns, which I don't really count as like a school reading book. And the first book that we read in class was All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. Thinking about this book is weird because I know it was a very staunch anti-war book and it had a very interesting narrator, but I don't remember the plot much, but I do remember loving reading it. I had heard mixed things about it going into it, but I just felt that the narrator was very strong, and it was any book that doesn't have a beautiful topic that you can find beauty in, like the writing, me as a writer, I appreciate. Next was The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and I beautifully wrote that to catch 'em all on the bottom of it. This book is transformative for so many people, and what I will say is that I understand it. I can understand a 15, 16-year-old sitting down and reading this book and having it change their lives. I feel like what Catcher in the Rye does for some people is it tells them that they are allowed to feel and that their teenage feelings are real and valid and that you're allowed to experience these emotions, and that's something really important for someone to realize. And if this book is the first time you're getting to realize that, then that's monumental for some people. I just didn't have that feeling, and because it didn't have that emotional connection with me, I found the main character, Holden Caulfield, very annoying instead of relatable, and I just found the whole plot to be kind of like daft and whatever. So I understand Catcher in the Rye and I would recommend it to people. I just didn't love it. And then I don't really know if this should count. We read Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut next, and by we read, I mean I probably read the first 3 chapters and then gave up. I just didn't get it at the time. It was hard to get into, it was complicated. There were no characters to really relate to, it was just a bunch of mishmash thrown together. Then moving on to junior year, and I actually really want to talk about my summer reading book that year, we start with Lies My Teacher Told Me by fucking James W. Lowen. What I didn't like about it was the tone of the author. I didn't like how biased it was and how overwhelmingly cocky it was. You read a book and want to be respected by the author, and I did not feel respected by James W. Lowen. I felt like he knew he was smarter than us and wanted to prove it. The first book we read in class that year was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I had actually read freshman year and then read again junior year in class. This is another absolute classic that people swear their souls to that I understand but don't connect with. It shows the glamour of the 1920s and the problems with wealth and the obsession of Jay Gatsby for Daisy Buchanan, and it shows all of these great things, and I think it was very well done. It's beautifully written. Fitzgerald is an amazing author. Just wasn't anything like fantastic to me. And then we read The Grapes of Wrath by my guy, John Steinbeck. And this is similar to Slaughterhouse-Five, in which I read it. And I get it, it's a classic. It tells the struggle of a family and how they have to live and still love each other and be happy amidst tough times. I just, again, didn't feel much with it. So those were the books I read junior year, and I actually forgot to mention that was the year I was taking AP English Language, so we focused a lot more on nonfiction and rhetorical strategies and stuff like that year. But now, as we move on to my favorite year, senior year, which was AP Literature, and we got to read so many good things, and I'm really excited. Our summer reading book was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which was actually my least favorite book of the year, and it had nothing to do with the plot or anything. I mentioned something like this before, that I don't like when an author doesn't trust me, and it felt like Achebe would repeat facts a lot of the times, and I'm just sitting there like, yes, I know, please get on with it, I understand. But yeah, this tells the story of a village in Nigeria, and I think it is a very powerful story. I think it's something, again, important for a town like mine to read that's all white, and you don't get out and you don't see these cultures, and this is a very real depiction of a very different culture, so I don't regret that I read it. I would just sometimes feel agitated while reading it. The first book we read in class was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which was such a good book. Oh my god. You have this girl who is brought up and treated so poorly, and the way that she blossoms, both when she's given things that she needs and when things are taken away. We read that book through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you got to really see that she was self-actualized when she had so little, and that's an important lesson for people to learn, that sometimes when everything's taken from you, you can still be the most true version of you. And Jane is just such an inspiring character, and her story is so beautiful. Some people see Jane Eyre as just a romance book, which is wrong. It's a book about Jane and then a subplot of her and romantic interest, which I won't spoil for you. But, you know, it's about her and her journey, and I think it's very beautiful for anyone, not just girls, to read. The next book we read was Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which I have very positive mixed feelings about. The philosophy of Siddhartha is basically that you cannot learn something by reading or by following, but you have to find it within yourself. But then it creates this weird little loop, because by following that idea, you've just gotten it from a book, and then it wasn't original, and that you can't truly find it, and this creates this whole little paradox of sorts that you then don't know where to go from there. If you ignore that, though, it is a really beautiful story of this guy Siddhartha trying to find his meaning and trying to find his life, and it's not a book about something with philosophy thrown in. It's about a guy trying to find his philosophy, and it's not for everyone, but it is something that I found very interesting. The next book we read was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which, goddamn. On the technical side of things, I am a sucker for anything that's written poetically, and that book is just laced with poeticism, and Morrison's words are so beautiful. She can take any scenario, no matter how grueling and dirty it is, and somehow find the words to make it amazing. And then again, I have this theme throughout a lot of these books that novels are meant to open up worlds to people who wouldn't otherwise see them, and, you know, The Bluest Eye is about African-American girls and growing up and what it's like in, oh my god, Ohio, something Ohio. Lorain, Ohio, that's what it is. It's about these girls growing up in Lorain, Ohio, and about prejudice and about beauty and these things that I have never had to experience, that this book opens up, you know, a whole other realm of knowledge for me. And not only knowledge, of understanding, you know, of empathy. And that a simple, relatively short book can do that for me is amazing. Next, we have Hamlet by William Shakespeare, and I cannot say enough good things about this book. I am such a Hamlet girl. It's my favorite play that I've read. It's just so good. There's so many dynamic characters in Hamlet that you could look at one and talk about it for hours on end about how complex and how beautiful they are. And that's not to say that everyone in Hamlet's good, because I wouldn't really characterize King Claudius as a beautiful person, or even Hamlet as a beautiful person. I just think that as literary points, they're so fascinating. It opens you up to the harshness of Hamlet, but also the kindness of Horatio. I mean, that last scene, one of Horatio's last lines, I'm obviously not going to spoil anything, but just like warms my heart every time that someone could be so selfless. Man, I love Horatio. I could gush about this book for days, but I'm not going to. It's my favorite play. Second to last, we have The Stranger by Albert Camus, which is my favorite book of all time. I think I've talked about it like 6 times in videos, but it's not for everyone, definitely not for everyone. This book was my introduction to existentialism and absurdism and the idea that life doesn't matter, and that life doesn't have to have meaning for me to enjoy it. And that's what this book taught me. I read it in freshman year and it kind of revolutionized my whole idea of thinking. But as much as it was eye-opening for me, it is eye-opening for other people in the sense that they cannot believe how heartless a human being can be. You know, the main character, Marceau, murders someone in this book and has little to no remorse. And people just read that and see how disgusting can a man be, how heartless can someone be. And I don't see it like that. You know, obviously there's a lot more to the book than just, shoot someone. But I find it beautiful. I find Marceau's journey through finding himself and finding his lack of meaning is beautiful to him and beautiful to me. He says at the end, I have been happy and I will be happy again. And I think that is just a beautiful meaning. I'm not going to talk about it more, but please read this book. And lastly, we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which again is a book I read freshman year and read again senior year. This is the best of all worlds. A brilliantly conceived utopia, references to Shakespeare, really interesting main characters, not multiple narrators, but multiple focuses, which is something I really like in a book when it's not just one story you're following multiple people's stories. It just kind of has the best of everything. If you've watched this whole thing, thank you so much. I love talking about books on my channel. And please tell me what you thought about any of these books or what you read in high school. And yeah, you will see me next time.